The airport buzzed like a beehive on a hot summer day, loud, chaotic, and full of people rushing in every direction. Suitcases rattled over tile floors. Announcements crackled through unseen speakers, and the scent of coffee and fast food hung in the air. Near Gate B12, tucked between a shuttered newsstand and a charging station full of tangled cords, sat an older woman in a navy blue coat. She wasn't moving like everyone else. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, eyes scanning the crowd with quiet patience. She wore small pearl earrings and a simple silver locket, the kind you might inherit from someone you loved deeply. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and though her face carried the soft lines of age, her posture was straight, almost proud. A worn leather suitcase rested at her feet, its corners scuffed from years of travel. On the handle, a faded luggage tag read, E. Whitmore, Seattle. Most people passing by didn't notice her at first, but those who did quickly looked away. Some slowed for just a second, glancing with curiosity or concern, then hurried off. A young couple whispered to each other as they walked past. "Is she okay?" the woman asked. "She's just sitting there, not moving." Her partner shrugged. "Maybe she's waiting for someone. Or lost." They kept walking. A flight attendant pushing a cart of snacks paused nearby, watching the woman for a moment. She offered a polite smile and said, "Ma'am, can I help you with anything?" The woman didn't respond. The attendant repeated herself a little louder this time. Still nothing. The woman simply looked at her, calm but unresponsive. The attendant frowned slightly, then moved on, assuming the woman either didn't speak English or was confused. She made a mental note to alert security if she was still there in 20 minutes. But the woman wasn't confused. She wasn't lost. And she certainly wasn't helpless. Her name was Eleanor, and she was waiting for her son. He was supposed to pick her up after her flight from Seattle. He'd texted earlier that morning. "Running late, big meeting ran over. Be there by 2:30, love you." It was now 3:15. She wasn't worried. She knew how it was. His world moved fast, full of deadlines and investors and global calls. She'd raised him alone after her husband passed, working double shifts as a librarian just to keep the lights on. She understood pressure. She also knew he'd come. He always did. What she didn't understand was why no one would look her in the eye. She'd been sitting here for nearly an hour, and in that time, dozens of people had passed within arm's reach. Some stared. Some whispered. Not one had tried to speak to her directly, not in a way that made sense. They shouted, waved, or gave up instantly when she didn't answer. They treated her like a problem to be solved or a ghost to be ignored. Eleanor was deaf. Not hard of hearing, completely, profoundly deaf since birth. She'd never heard the roar of an airplane engine, the chime of a boarding call, or the laughter of strangers in a terminal, but she saw everything. She read lips well, though it was exhausting, especially in a place like this where people talked fast, turned their heads, or covered their mouths. And she used American Sign Language, her true language, the one that flowed through her hands like breath. But here, in this sea of noise and motion, her language was invisible. No one recognized the small, unconscious signs she made when she thought no one was watching, her fingers tracing the shape of wait, or brushing her palm against her chest in the sign for son. To everyone else, it just looked like fidgeting. She sighed softly and adjusted her scarf. The terminal's air conditioning was too strong, and her joints ached from the long flight. She pulled a small notepad from her purse and wrote, "Daniel, still at gate. All good, don't rush." She didn't send it. She knew he'd feel guilty if he saw it. Better to let him come when he could. A child's voice suddenly rang out nearby, high-pitched and excited. "Dad, look. That lady's hands are talking." Eleanor glanced up. A little boy, maybe 6 years old, stood a few feet away, pointing at her with wide eyes. His father, a man in a wrinkled button-down shirt with a backpack slung over one shoulder, gently lowered the boy's arm. "Shh, buddy, we don't point," he said quietly, but his eyes met Eleanor's for just a second, long enough for her to see something different there. Not pity. Not confusion, just recognition. The man gave her a small nod before guiding his son toward a nearby bench. Eleanor watched them go, her heart lifting just a little. Maybe not everyone saw her as a stranger. She turned her gaze back to the gate screen. Flights blinked on and off, LAX, JFK, ORD, none of them mattered. She was waiting for one person. Just one, time stretched. The crowd thinned slightly as afternoon turned toward evening. A janitor mopped near the restrooms, whistling under his breath. A businessman argued loudly on the phone about quarterly reports. A group of teenagers laughed over shared fries. Life moved on around her, loud and careless. Eleanor didn't mind the silence. She'd lived in it her whole life. But sometimes, in places like this, where everyone was connected by sound, by voices calling names, by laughter and music and announcements, it could feel lonely. Not because she missed hearing, but because she missed being seen. She remembered flying with her son when he was young. He'd learned basic signs before he could speak. Milk, more, love. He'd hold her hands and mimic her movements, giggling when he got them wrong. Back then, the world felt smaller, kinder. People made an effort. Teachers, neighbors, even strangers at the grocery store, they'd try. A thumbs up, a written note, a clumsy but earnest hello in sign. Now, most people didn't even know sign language existed unless they saw it in a movie. And if they did see a deaf person, they often assumed they were slow, confused, or broken. Eleanor had long since stopped correcting them. It took too much energy. She checked her watch again. 3:42, still no Daniel. Just then, the little boy from earlier wandered back toward her, dragging his stuffed dinosaur behind him. He stopped a few feet away and stared, not rudely but with open curiosity. Eleanor smiled at him. He grinned back. "Your hands are talking," he said again, this time softer. She nodded slowly, then lifted one hand and made the sign for hello. Palm out. Fingers together, a gentle wave, the boy's eyes widened. Whoa. His father appeared behind him, crouching down. "Leo, come on, we're boarding soon." But then he looked at Eleanor. Really looked. And after a beat, he signed back, just 2 signs, but clear and confident. "Hello, you okay?" Eleanor's breath caught. It had been years since a stranger signed to her in public. Years since someone had reached across that invisible wall without being asked. She signed back, her movement smooth and sure. "Waiting for my son. He's late." The man's face softened. He didn't speak aloud. He just nodded and signed. "We're waiting too. Long day?" And just like that, the airport didn't feel so loud anymore. Or so lonely. But that moment, warm and unexpected, was still ahead. For now, Eleanor sat alone once more, the man and his son returning to their bench. Yet something had shifted. The air felt lighter. Hope, quiet but real, settled in her chest. She straightened her coat, smoothed her scarf, and waited. Not just for her son, but for the world to remember that silence doesn't mean absence. That a person can be whole, complete, and full of stories, even if they don't speak a word you can hear. And somewhere down the concourse, footsteps hurried toward gate B12. Late, but coming. Always coming. The man settled back onto the bench with his son, but his mind wasn't on the flight board or the crumpled boarding pass in his hand. He kept glancing toward the woman by gate B12, the one with the quiet eyes and the hands that moved like they were telling secrets only some could understand. His son, still clutching his stuffed dinosaur, leaned against his arm. "Dad," the boy whispered. "Why was that lady signing?" He smiled faintly. "Because that's how she talks. Like Maya at school?" "Yeah, just like Maya." Maya was his son's classmate, bright, quick to laugh, and deaf since birth. The school had started an inclusion program a year ago, and part of it involved basic sign language for all the kids. His son came home every week with new signs: apple, friend, bathroom, and practiced them with serious concentration. At first it was just mimicry, but over time something deeper took root. The boy began noticing when people didn't know how to talk to Maya. He'd step in, shy but determined, and sign what she needed to say. It broke his heart a little in the best way, to see his child choose kindness without being told to. He hadn't used sign language much since his wife passed. She'd been hard of hearing, not completely deaf, but they'd learned ASL together early in their relationship. Not out of necessity, but out of love. It became their private language during late-night talks, hospital visits, even arguments. When she got sick, those silent conversations held more honesty than words ever could. After she was gone, he stopped signing. It hurt too much. But for his son, he'd picked it up again, slowly, awkwardly at first, like relearning how to ride a bike. Now, watching that woman sit alone while the world rushed past her, he felt a familiar tug in his chest. Not pity, not guilt, just the quiet understanding that comes when you've stood on the other side of silence and know how heavy it can feel. His son tugged his sleeve again. "Can we go say hi?" He hesitated. Striking up a conversation with a stranger in an airport wasn't something he usually did. He was a quiet person by nature. Worked from home most days, kept to himself, focused on raising his boy the best he could. But then he thought of Maya's mom, who once told him, "The hardest part isn't being deaf. It's being invisible." He stood up. "Okay, but be gentle. She might not want to talk." They walked over slowly, not rushing, giving her space. The woman looked up as they approached. Her expression didn't change much, but her eyes softened, like she recognized something in them. He stopped a few feet away and raised his hand. Not to wave, but to sign. "Hello, are you waiting for someone?" Her face lit up instantly, not with surprise, but with relief. Like someone had finally turned on a light in a dark room. She signed back, her movements fluid and graceful. "My son. He's late. Big meeting," he nodded. "We're waiting too. Flight got delayed." She smiled then, a real one, warm and unhurried. She patted the empty seat beside her. He sat and his son climbed onto his lap without hesitation, eyes wide with wonder. "What's she saying, Dad?" She said her son's coming. "He's a busy man. Is he nice?" The woman, Eleanor, though he didn't know her name yet, laughed silently, her shoulders shaking. She signed something quick. She says, he translated, "He tries." His son giggled. "That's what you say about me when I spill juice." Eleanor's eyes crinkled at the corners. She turned to the boy and signed slowly, clearly. "You're sweet." The boy beamed. "Did she just call me sweet?" "Yeah, she did." For the next 20 minutes they talked, not with voices but with hands and smiles and the occasional scribbled note when a sign was too complex. Eleanor learned that the man was traveling home after a work trip, that his son was in first grade, that they lived in a small town with too many trees and not enough sidewalks. He learned that Eleanor had been a librarian for 40 years, that she loved mystery novels and strong tea, and that she'd raised her son alone after her husband died young. At one point, his son leaned over and signed clumsily. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Eleanor paused, then signed back with exaggerated seriousness. "Only the quiet ones." The boy burst out laughing. "She's funny." "She is," the man agreed, smiling. Around them, the airport kept moving, people rushing, carts clattering, announcements blaring, but their little corner felt still, like a pocket of calm in the middle of a storm. A flight attendant walking by slowed her pace, watching them with curiosity. She'd seen this woman earlier, ignored and alone. Now she was animated, her hands dancing, her eyes bright. The attendant didn't say anything. She just gave a small respectful nod before continuing on. A businessman in a wrinkled suit stopped mid-stride, phone pressed to his ear, and stared for a long moment. Then, almost shyly, he gave a thumbs up before hurrying off. It wasn't much, but it was something. Eleanor noticed it too. She turned to the man and signed. "People usually look through me, like I'm glass." He met her gaze. "Not today." She didn't respond right away. She just looked at his son, who was now showing her how his dinosaur could roar silently by opening and closing its plush jaws. There was a tenderness in her expression, like she was seeing not just a child but a memory of her own boy decades ago. After a while, the man checked his watch. "Our flight boards in 10 minutes, Eleanor nodded. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook and pen. She wrote quickly, then tore out the page and handed it to him. It read, "Thank you for seeing me." He swallowed hard. "You're welcome," he said aloud, then signed it too, just in case. She patted his son's knee. "Be kind. The world needs it." "I will," the boy promised, signing "thank you" the way his teacher had shown him. Hand over heart, then forward. They stood to leave. As they walked away, the man glanced back once. Eleanor was sitting straight again, hands in her lap, but her posture was different now. Lighter, less alone. Back at their gate, his son tugged his hand. "Dad, do you think she's still sad?" "No," he said. "I think she's okay now." "Because we talked to her?" "Yeah, because we did." Boarding began and they joined the line. As they handed over their passes, the gate agent smiled. "Long day?" "You could say that," he replied. But it ended well. On the plane, his son fell asleep before takeoff, dinosaur tucked under his arm. The man stared out the window at the runway lights blinking in the dusk. He thought about how easy it is to walk past someone who seems different, how we assume they don't want to be bothered, or that we wouldn't know what to say. But sometimes all it takes is one small gesture, one sign, one moment of courage. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to his sister. "Hey, remember that ASL app Mom used to use? Can you send me the link? I think Leo and I should practice more." Then he leaned his head back and closed his eyes, not sleeping, just thinking. About silence, about connection, about how the smallest acts, like signing hello to a stranger, can echo louder than any announcement over an airport speaker. And somewhere behind them, back at gate B12, a woman sat waiting, no longer invisible, her heart a little fuller than it had been an hour before. The conversation between the woman and the man flowed like a quiet river, steady, calm and full of things left unsaid but deeply understood. Around them, the airport kept its usual rhythm. Rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, the occasional cry of a tired child. But in that little space near gate B12, time seemed to slow down. No one rushed them. No one interrupted. For the first time all day, the woman didn't feel like a ghost passing through a world that couldn't hear her. She signed about her son, how he'd been a curious boy who asked 1,000 questions a day, how he used to sit at the kitchen table after school and practice writing with his left hand, just to see if it felt different. She smiled as she described how he'd learned his first sign before he could say mama, a wobbly, determined more when he wanted another cookie. The man listened, nodding, his eyes soft. He knew that look. The look of a parent who remembered every tiny moment, even the ones the child had long forgotten. In return, he told her about raising his boy alone after his wife got sick. He didn't go into details, no dramatic hospital scenes or tearful goodbyes, but he didn't need to. She saw it in the way his hands paused mid-sign, in the slight tightening around his eyes when he mentioned bedtime routines or school plays. She knew grief. She'd carried it for years after her husband passed, raising a child in a world that offered little patience for a single mother who couldn't hear the PTA meetings or the playground gossip. "You taught him to sign?" she asked, glancing at the boy who was now pretending his dinosaur was having a tea party with a crumpled napkin. "He learned at school," he replied, "but I helped my wife. She used to sign with me, so I kept it up for him." She reached out and gently touched his forearm, a small human gesture, not part of any sign, just warmth. He didn't pull away. He just nodded like he understood exactly what she meant. The boy looked up. "Are you talking about Mom?" "Yeah," his dad said gently. "She'd be proud of you, you know, for talking to new people, for being kind." The boy beamed, then turned to the woman. "My mom's in the stars now, but she still watches." The woman's eyes glistened. She signed slowly so he could follow. Then she sees a good boy. He grinned like he'd just won a prize. A flight attendant passing by paused again. This time she didn't just nod, she walked over. "Can I get you anything?" she asked the woman, speaking clearly and making eye contact. Then remembering, she added with a small hopeful gesture, "Coffee? Water?" The woman signed tea, and the attendant, though she didn't understand the sign, saw the shape of the word on her lips. "Hot tea? Coming right up." Minutes later, she returned with a steaming cup and a honey packet. "Earl Grey," she said with a smile. "Best we've got." The woman signed "thank you," and the attendant, instead of walking away, mimicked the motion awkwardly, hand flat, moving from chin outward. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The woman laughed, a silent shoulder-shaking laugh, and gave her a thumbs up. Other people started noticing. A teenager waiting nearby pulled out her phone and showed her friend a video of the two signing. "That's so cool," she whispered. An older man in a baseball cap watched for a while, then turned to his wife and said, "We should learn that. For when we visit the grandkids, they've got a deaf neighbor." No one approached. No one intruded. But the air changed. The woman wasn't the deaf lady anymore. She was just a person, a mother, a storyteller, someone worth listening to even without sound. Then from down the concourse, a familiar voice called out, sharp with stress, loud with urgency. "Mom!" Both the man and the boy turned. A man in a dark suit, tie slightly loose, hair messy from running, hurried toward them. His eyes were wide with worry, then relief when he saw his mother sitting calmly, sipping tea, hands still moving in quiet conversation. He skidded to a stop in front of her. "I'm so sorry." The meeting went sideways, my car got stuck in traffic, my phone died. He was talking fast, not signing, not even looking at her face to see if she was following. The woman held up one hand, palm out. A universal signal for stop. He froze, she signed, calm but firm. Breathe. He blinked. Then slowly he exhaled. He crouched down so he was at her eye level and signed back, a little rusty but clear. I'm sorry I'm late. She softened. You're here now. He nodded, then finally noticed the man and the boy sitting beside her. His expression shifted, confusion, then curiosity. Were you talking with my mom? The man stood, gently lifting his sleepy son onto his hip. We were waiting for our flight. Your mom was kind enough to keep us company. The son looked between them, then at his mother, who gave a small, proud nod. You sign? The businessman asked, surprised. A little, the man said. My son's class has a deaf student. We've been learning. The businessman's face changed again. This time something like shame flickered in his eyes. He looked at his mother. I should have been here sooner. She reached out and touched his cheek, the way mothers do when words aren't enough. It's okay, she signed. You're here. The man shifted his son to his other arm. We should go. Our flight's boarding. The woman stood and pulled him into a quick one-armed hug. Then she turned to the boy, who was half asleep but still holding his dinosaur. She signed to him, be brave. Be kind. He yawned and signed back the only way he knew how, hand over heart, then out. Thank you. As they walked away, the businessman watched them go. Who were they? His mother signed, people who saw me. He didn't respond right away. He just helped her gather her things, the teacup, her purse, the scuffed suitcase. But something had shifted in him. He'd spent his whole life building a company that prided itself on human-centered design. Yet he'd just watched a stranger do more for his mother in 20 minutes than he had in months. At the curb, his driver waited with the car. As they loaded her bag into the trunk, he turned to her. Mom, do you ever feel alone? At the airport? Or anywhere? She looked at him, really looked. Then she signed, and sometimes. But not today, he swallowed. I'm going to do better. She patted his arm. I know. Back inside the terminal, the man and his son reached their gate just as the final boarding call came over the speaker. The boy was nearly asleep, head heavy on his father's shoulder. As they walked down the jet bridge, the man glanced back one last time. Through the glass, he saw the businessman helping his mother into a sleek black car. She turned as if sensing his gaze and raised her hand. Not a wave, but the sign for thank you. He signed it back. On the plane, he buckled his son in and tucked the dinosaur under his arm. The engines roared to life, but he didn't hear them. All he heard was the quiet hum of connection, the kind that doesn't need volume to be real. And miles away, in the backseat of that car, the woman leaned her head against the window, eyes closed, a small smile on her lips. She wasn't just someone's mother. She wasn't just the CEO's deaf mom. She was seen. She was heard. And for today, that was enough. The black car pulled away from the curb, gliding smoothly into the stream of evening traffic. Inside, the woman sat quietly, her hands resting in her lap, still warm from the tea and the unexpected kindness of strangers. Her son sat beside her, unusually silent. He kept glancing at her in the dim light, his expression unreadable, part guilt, part something softer like wonder. He'd spent the last hour replaying the scene at the gate in his head, the way his mother's face had lit up when that man signed to her. The ease with which they'd talked, like they'd known each other for years. The way his own chest had tightened when he realized, I haven't signed with her in months. Not because he didn't care. He did, deeply. But life had gotten loud. Meetings, emails, investor calls, global launches. He'd hired assistants to handle her travel, arranged luxury cars to pick her up, even installed a video relay service in her home so she could call him anytime. He thought he was doing enough. But watching her laugh with a stranger, a single dad with tired eyes and a sleepy child, he saw the truth. None of it mattered if she still felt alone. Mom, he finally said, turning toward her. He signed as he spoke, slower than before, more deliberate. I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner. She looked at him, her eyes steady. You're here now. She signed back, just as she had at the gate. But I should have been there from the start. You waited over an hour. She tilted her head slightly. Waiting isn't the hard part. Being invisible is, he flinched. Not because the words were harsh, but because they were true. He thought of all the times he'd texted instead of calling, sent a driver instead of picking her up himself, assumed that money and convenience were the same as care. He'd built a company that claimed to connect people, yet he'd let the most important person in his life drift into silence. The car turned onto the highway, city lights blurring past the windows. He took a breath. Tell me about them, the man and his son. A small smile touched her lips. She signed slowly, painting the story with her hands. How the boy had noticed her signing to herself. How his father hadn't hesitated to approach. How they'd talked about school, books, grief, and dinosaurs. She didn't say it outright, but he heard the message beneath her signs. They saw me as a person, not a problem. He nodded, throat tight. He signed well, for someone who's not deaf. He learned for love, she signed, not for show. That hit him hardest. Because he knew, really knew, that he'd stopped signing with her not because it was hard, but because it reminded him of how much he missed his father, how much responsibility he carried, how alone she must have felt all those years raising him by herself. He'd let guilt turn into distance. When they reached her apartment, a quiet, sunlit place filled with books and framed photos, he helped her inside and set her suitcase by the door. She went to the kitchen to make tea, moving with the quiet grace of someone who'd lived alone for decades but never let loneliness harden her heart. He followed and leaned against the counter. I've been thinking, he said, signing as he spoke, about Viridian. About what we're building. She raised an eyebrow, waiting. We talk a lot about innovation, accessibility, inclusion, but today, I realize we're missing something. He paused. We design for people like me, people who hear, who speak, who move through the world without barriers. But we don't design for people like you. Not really. She set down the kettle and faced him. You don't have to design for me, she signed gently. Just remember I exist. I do, he said quickly. I always have. But I forgot to show it. She reached out and touched his wrist, the same way she used to when he was a boy and scared of thunderstorms. It's never too late to start again. He stayed for tea. Not the rushed kind he usually drank between calls, but the slow kind. Steeping leaves, warm mugs, silence that didn't need filling. They didn't talk about business or the future. They talked about the book she was reading, the neighbor's cat that kept stealing her garden herbs, the way the light hit the park across the street in the early morning. Simple things. Human things. Later, as he got ready to leave, she handed him a folded piece of paper, the note she'd written earlier at the airport but never sent. He opened it. In her neat handwriting it read, "The world is louder than ever, but kindness is still the clearest sound." He folded it carefully and put it in his coat pocket right over his heart. Back at his office the next morning, he canceled his first 3 meetings. Instead, he gathered his leadership team in the main conference room, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows and sleek white chairs that cost more than most people's cars. He didn't start with numbers or projections. He started with a story. He told them about his mother waiting at the gate, about the sea of people who looked away, about the single dad who stopped, signed, "Hello," and changed everything. I built this company to solve problems, he said, voice low but firm. But I ignored the biggest one right in front of me, that convenience isn't connection. That accessibility isn't a feature, it's a promise. He looked around the room, at the faces of people who'd helped him build an empire. We're going to do better, starting today. By noon, an email went out to every employee. Mandatory ASL basics training for all customer-facing roles, partnerships with national deaf advocacy groups, redesign of their app's interface to include real-time captioning and video relay integration, a new advisory council, led by members of the deaf and hard-of-hearing community, to guide product development. Some executives raised eyebrows. Is this really necessary? One asked quietly. It's not our core user base, he looked the man in the eye. It is now. That evening, he drove to his mother's apartment himself. No driver, no assistant. Just him, a bag of her favorite pastries, and a beginner's ASL workbook he'd bought on the way. She opened the door, surprised. He held up the book and signed a little awkwardly, "Teach me." She smiled, the same warm, unhurried smile she'd given the stranger at the airport, and stepped aside to let him in. And as they sat at her kitchen table, hands moving slowly, patiently, relearning a language of love they'd both let fade, the world outside kept spinning. But in that quiet room, something important was being rebuilt. Not with code or capital, but with presence, with humility, with the simple, powerful act of showing up, because sometimes the most revolutionary thing a person can do isn't to change the world, but to finally see the one person who's been waiting for them all along. Weeks passed, and the ripples from that afternoon at the airport kept spreading, quietly at first, then wider, like circles in a pond after a single stone drops in. The man who'd signed hello to the woman at gate B12 went back to his ordinary life, packing school lunches, fixing leaky faucets, reading bedtime stories. He didn't expect anything to come of it. He'd just done what felt right, what his wife would have done, what his son's teacher had taught them: see people. Really see them. But then one rainy Tuesday, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, just his name and street in neat handwriting. Inside was a handwritten note on soft cream paper and 2 tickets to a performance at the city's Deaf Theater Company. A play performed entirely in American Sign Language, with open captions for hearing audiences. The note read, "You gave me back my voice that day. Let me share someone else's with you." He read it 3 times, then showed it to his son, who immediately started jumping up and down. "We're going to a real show? With signing?" "Looks like it," he said, smiling. The night of the performance, they dressed up. His son in a button-down shirt that kept slipping off his shoulders. Him in a clean sweater he hadn't worn since his wife's memorial. They took the bus downtown, the boy chattering the whole way about what the play might be about. "Do you think there'll be dinosaurs?" he asked hopefully. "Probably not," his dad said, "but there might be dragons." When they arrived at the small, brick theater tucked between a bookstore and a bakery, they were greeted by warm lights and the hum of quiet conversation. Hands moving, faces animated, laughter that didn't need sound to be felt. Near the entrance, standing beside a potted fern, was the woman from the airport. She wore a deep green dress and the same silver locket. Her eyes lit up when she saw them. She signed before they even reached her. "You came." "Wouldn't miss it," he signed back. She hugged his son first, gentle, like she remembered how small he was, and then gave the man a firm, grateful squeeze. No words were needed. They found their seats together, 3 in a row near the center. As the lights dimmed and the actors took the stage, the room fell into a different kind of silence. Not empty, but full. Every gesture, every expression, every shift of the body told a story richer than words alone ever could. His son watched, wide-eyed, not understanding every sign but feeling the emotion behind them. The joy, the heartbreak, the hope. During a quiet moment in the second act, the boy leaned over and whispered, "It's like they're painting with their hands." The man nodded. "Yeah, they are." After the show, they met the cast in the lobby. The woman introduced them as friends, and the actors greeted them warmly, some signing, some writing notes, all making space for the boy's clumsy but earnest attempts to say thank you and amazing. One actress, her hair braided with red ribbons, knelt to his level and signed slowly, "You're welcome here, always." On the bus ride home, the boy fell asleep against the window, the theater program clutched in his hand. The man stared out at the passing streetlights, thinking about how something so small, a few signs, a shared cup of tea, had led them here, to a night of beauty and belonging. Meanwhile, across town, the woman's son stood at a podium in a sleek downtown conference center. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward in their seats. He wasn't announcing a new product or a record profit. He was unveiling something quieter but deeper. Viridian's new accessibility pledge. No more half measures. No more "we'll get to it later." From now on, every app, every customer service line, every public event would be designed with deaf and hard of hearing users at the center. Not as an afterthought, but as equals. He didn't mention his mother by name, but those who knew him saw the truth in his eyes. This wasn't just business. It was love. It was repair. After the press conference, a young reporter asked, "What changed your mind?" He paused, then signed his answer before speaking it aloud. "I finally listened." Back at his office later that week, he found a small package on his desk. Inside was a children's book, The Boy Who Spoke with His Hands, and a note from his mother, "For your future children. Or for you, when you need reminding. He placed it on his shelf right beside his first business plan. Months turned into a year. The man and his son kept practicing sign language, not just for school but because it felt like keeping a promise. They volunteered at a community center once a month, helping with events for deaf families. The boy made a new friend, a girl who signed faster than anyone he'd ever seen. And they'd spend afternoons building block towers and telling silent jokes only they understood. One spring afternoon, as they walked home from the park, the boy asked, "Do you think the lady from the airport is happy now?" The man thought about it. "I think she always was. She just needed someone to notice." And we did. We did. That same week, the woman sat on her balcony with a cup of tea, watching sparrows hop along the railing. Her son visited every Sunday now, not out of duty but because he wanted to. They'd sign about everything: the weather, his work, her garden, memories of his father. Sometimes they'd sit in comfortable silence, hands resting on the table between them. No need to fill the space with noise. She'd started writing again, short stories about librarians, detectives, and women who found their voices in unexpected places. One had even been accepted by a small literary magazine. When the editor asked for a photo, she sent one of her hands mid-sign, sunlight catching the silver of her locket. Life didn't become perfect. There were still days when the world felt too loud, too fast, too quick to look away. But now there were also moments of quiet connection, more than before. Strangers who smiled instead of staring. Cashiers who wrote notes instead of shouting. A barista who learned to sign "Your coffee is ready." And every so often, she'd get a postcard from a small town with too many trees, drawn by a 6-year-old hand, always featuring a dinosaur wearing a scarf, and signed with a heart. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, she opened her journal and wrote, "Kindness doesn't need an audience. It just needs a start." She closed the book, sipped her tea, and watched the sky turn gold. Because in the end, that's what it was all about. Not grand gestures or viral moments, but the simple human choice to reach out when no one else would, to see someone not for what they lack but for who they are. And sometimes, in the middle of a crowded airport, that's enough to change everything.